My favorite spring albums. Now we completed the year. I've made a video about my favorite summer albums, favorite autumn albums, favorite winter albums, and now the last of the bunch are the favorite spring albums. Let's start with the honorable mentions as usual. I've got, I can't really say why an album to me is a spring album or a summer album or an autumn album. Of course it has to do with the atmosphere of the music, but sometimes maybe there's also a bit of when I first listened to an album or for some abstract reasons why the time of year when I usually like to listen to a certain album the most. With the first honorable mention, Hello Nasty by the Beach Boys, it's a bit like that I can't really say why this is a spring album to me, but I associate it with that time of year, maybe because there are some songs like Song for Junior, I don't know, they have a bit of that kind of not yet summer, but it's getting warmer atmosphere to me. This is maybe a late spring album, like in May or something, or even June. Another honorable mentions, they had to be in there. It's again Belle and Sebastian, this time with Dear Catastrophe Waitress. We've had a Belle and Sebastian album in every season, at least the honorable mentions, but sometimes even in the top 10. I think, Boy with the Arab Strap was in the summer list. Fold Your Hands, Child You Walk Like a Peasant, which is my favorite Belle and Sebastian album, was in autumn, and Tiger Milk was in winter. No, If You're Feeling Sinister, but I think Tiger Milk, If You're Feeling Sinister are both winter albums. This is the spring album, very seasonal band in a way. And we've got one more, or maybe two or three more honorable mentions. It's by the same band, I couldn't decide which album. I think I also associate them all with springtime music. I'm not a big jazz fan, but it's Weather Report, great jazz band from the 70s, but it's more like jazz rock or fusion, so you don't have to be a die-hard jazz connoisseur to really relate to that music. It's very, energetic music, very lively music. I associate it with spring. And now the top 10. 10 again is like with Weather Report, I couldn't decide. It's Led Zeppelin. I think the first mention on this channel of Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin 2 and Led Zeppelin 3. They're both, to me, they're spring albums. This maybe is, most people would agree maybe more on Led Zeppelin 3, which is considered a folk album, the acoustic. I mean, there's Immigrant Song starts off, which is not very folky at all and not very spring-like, the song about Vikings, this is probably more a very wintry song. But after, if you pretend there's no Immigrant Song, which is of course one of the highlights of that album, then Led Zeppelin 3 would be an astonishingly spring-like album, astonishingly good spring album. Led Zeppelin 2, to me, it starts the tradition of the folky Led Zeppelin songs with songs like Thank You, Ramble On. Those have like this energy of let's start. Spring has always something to do with a fresh start. What's on this? What Is and What Should Never Be is more like the melancholic spring. Then there are the great riff songs, Heartbreaker, Whole Lotta Love, which maybe aren't very spring-like, but Whole Lotta Love with that orgasm climax in the middle section. You could associate this kind of sexual energy also with spring, of course. There's one song on that album can't find it. Oh, I think I've already talked about it. Thank You, which is a very spring-like song. Number 9 is Talking Book by Stevie Wonder. Next to Inner Visions and the big masterpiece songs In the Key of Life, my favorite. Stevie Wonder album, Songs in the Key of Life was, I don't know, maybe number 4, 5 or 6 in my the greatest summer albums of all time. This is a very spring-like album. Starts off with You Are the Sunshine of My Life, which is like a spring morning, like one of the first sunny mornings in April. If you're living in Australia, then it's maybe October, November, I don't know. What's there? Then there's Superstition, of course. Yeah, it's a very spring-like album. It has a bit, it shares some vibes with the Weather Report albums. You know, it has this jazzy kind of spring feel to it. The next one is more like the, I don't know, the British Spring Area by Kate Bush. One of her most underrated albums, and maybe this is a contender for my unregular series of underrated albums. You know, I think this is a masterpiece. It's considered like a good Kate Bush album, but you know, I think it's more than just a good Kate Bush album. I think in my Kate Bush album rankings it was number 3, but that only shows you how good Kate Bush is in general, because number 2 and 1, you know, there was no discussion that those are really big masterpieces. But this is also a masterpiece, and it's also a very, yeah, it gives you an atmosphere of that resembles spring, in my opinion. Now something completely different. At number 7 I've got Park Life by Blur. Now in the middle section we've got a Britpop section. You know, for some reason I associate the classic mid-90s Britpop with spring, maybe also because those bands symbolized like a fresh start, a restart for British music and pop culture. You know, the Cool Britannia, it was always very energetic and joyous and glorious. You know, that was the opposite to grunge. You know, some people even say it was like a direct reaction to the, you know, miserable grunge things. And you know, I'm more in team Britpop. I'm not in team grunge, I have to say. Number 6, Different Class by Pulp. Maybe the greatest of those Britpop albums ever. Maybe the best 90s Britpop album ever. You see how old that copy is, the hype sticker. You know, you can't even read what's on the hype sticker. I bought it, you know, when it came out, and well, it was 1995, so I'm not good at counting. 27 years. So for 27 years, this never gets old. You know, especially in springtime. You know, each year I will give it a spin or two, and it doesn't get old, doesn't get any, you know, it's still fresh, it sounds still like a, you know, like the masterpiece that it is. Number 5 is also a classic Britpop album, maybe as an album not as good as Different Class, but maybe I connected even more with that optimistic springtime. It's What's the Story, Morning Glory by Oasis. This is, you know, like a triumphant, glorious, it's getting better, although that's on a different Oasis album, that song, but it's like the atmosphere of now things are getting better, and you know that the big anthems are on the great album. Not the best Oasis album, just watch my Oasis ranking videos to find out more about that, but a great album and the most successful album, of course. Number 4 is by Prince, Around the World in a Day, his 1985 follow-up to Purple Rain. At the time, maybe considered slightly a flop, because Purple Rain was this huge seller, selling, I don't know, maybe 30 million copies. This is still one of his 2 or 3 biggest sellers, but you know, in comparison to Purple Rain, it paled, but not as an album to me. It's my second favorite Prince album. Purple Rain is my favorite album, but this is a great evolution for him, for his sound. You know. Number 3 already, very underrated album, especially outside of Britain or maybe outside of Europe. I think in America they are considered a one-hit wonder, but that one hit was on that album. I think they had more than one hit, at least outside of the US, and they had more than one great album, but this is my favorite album by theirs, To Rye A by Dexys Midnight Runners. The big hit I'm referring to is, of course, Come On Eileen. But it's packed with classics if you're a Dexys Midnight Runners fan, and it's again, it's a stomping, upbeat, optimistic, fun album. It's a fun album, you know, like Celtic, Irish soul pop with new wave elements. Other great songs next to Common Aline. You know, the complete album is a masterpiece. But the Celtic Soul Brothers, Let's Make This Precious, Jackie Wilson said, Van Morrison cover, Plan B, Ryes A to E. You know, it's great. It's a great album. My number 2 album is probably one of my 20 favorite albums of all time. It's my favorite Neil Young album, Comes a Time, and this is more like the beginning, the start of spring, because I associate it also with, you know, some songs with a certain coldness and a wintry atmosphere. So maybe this is spring in Canada, and maybe this is spring in March, late March, early April, so when it's still, you get some cold days as well. But you know, all in all, this is a great folky album with great songs like Lotta Love, Going Back, Comes a Time. You know, this is a great spring album. And the next album is also, I think, my number 1 album is like the early spring, not the Weather Report is more like the May, June spring, and this is more like the March, April kind of spring. The best Beatles solo album of all time, All Things Must Pass by George Harrison. And you know, like he's singing in the title song, where it's all about things, you know, the cycle of things dying, or things getting dark, and then there's the rebirth, there's the things start to blossom again, a new day rises, the sun will shine again. This is, you know, a very spiritual album, and in that sense, in this, you know, the cycle of life, the circle of life thing, it's to me a very spring-like album. And again, like it's a bit like Comes a Time in that sense, that's this folky atmosphere that I tend to associate with spring. So that was my video of my favorite spring albums. Thank you very much for watching.